I was still in college when something terrifying happened to me at a party school in upstate New York. Though I wasn't in a sorority, I was known for attending plenty of fraternity parties. During this time, I was in the midst of a heavy drinking phase, but I figured it was good to get it all out of my system. One night, my friends Deanna and Kayla convinced me to head up a Kappa Sigma party. I sometimes rallied myself to go out. We pre-gamed heavily at our off-campus house, where I lived with 3 other girls. The house was just a casual place for friends, not a sorority or a team residence. After we drank enough to loosen up, we called an Uber and headed to the frat house, where I lost track of my memories after arriving. I vaguely remember some frat guys hanging out outside, the DJ pumping music in the living room, and beer pong tables set up in the kitchen. Later, I found out I had played beer pong with a random guy and ended up chatting with him for a while. But the next thing I knew, I was waking up disoriented, lying on the grass beside a dark road. My head pounded as I tried to piece together how I had ended up there. It was pitch black, and I felt cold and alone. Lying among the trees near a wooded area far from campus, I patted my pockets in a panic, realizing I had lost my phone and my crossbody bag. Fear gripped me tightly. I had no way to call for help or even figure out where I was. Desperately, I stumbled down the road towards some distant light posts. As I waited, my heart raced, and I began to wonder if I would be stuck there all night. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw headlights approaching. I stepped into the road, waving my arms and jumping to get the driver's attention. The car slowed to a stop, and the driver, a man who looked to be in his mid-30s, rolled down his window. I told him I was stranded and needed a ride home. He invited me in, and I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. But as we drove, I quickly realized that my relief was misplaced. The man asked me what had happened, and without thinking, I shared my unfortunate story about the party and losing my phone. Looking back, I should have kept my mouth shut. The driver's expression shifted. I could tell he was sizing me up. When I asked how far we had left to go, he responded with a disconcerting calmness, saying we were almost there, and we remained on that dark, empty road. My gut twisted with unease. Suddenly his tone changed as he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" His hand slid onto my knee, sending a wave of panic through me. I recoiled, pleading with him not to hurt me. Then as I'm saying that, all of a sudden he said, "Why would I hurt you?" But I didn't trust him at all. Just then, he pulled the car onto the grass and parked. That was my chance. I flung open the door and bolted into the woods, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted blindly, desperate to get away. Once I was hidden among the trees, I heard him yelling, "Where are you? I just want to have some fun." I pressed my hands over my mouth, stifling my breath in sheer terror. I waited in the darkness until I heard the sound of his car door slam and tires screech away. My heart was racing, and I slowly made my way back to the road, praying he was truly gone. I knew I needed help, but felt utterly helpless and alone. After a few agonizing moments, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. I waited until I was sure it was a different car before leaping into the road, waving my arms frantically. The driver, a man who looked a bit older, stopped, and I jumped into the back seat, still trembling from the last encounter. I could hardly speak now. I was just only answering his questions about what happened. Thankfully, he dropped me off at my house around 4 a.m. My friends were still awake, clearly worried about me, and they had my phone and bag. They had been contemplating calling the police if I hadn't returned, and no one knew who I had lived with, and the guy I had spoken with at the party claimed he didn't leave with me. In fact, there was no solid proof I had lived with anyone at all. I had no explanation for how I ended up on the side of that road, and the fear of that night haunted me long after. I made a vow to cut back on drinking and never again put myself in a position where I would have to rely on a stranger for a ride home. The experience changed everything, leaving me shaken but grateful to have escaped that terrifying situation. I was hitchhiking from Life, Germany to Paris, eager to retrieve my paintings from an exhibition. It was a sunny October day, and as a 29-year-old traveler, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. When I met a French man at a gas station, he was unshaven and scruffy, yet He agreed to give me a ride to Paris. The warmth of that day was deceptive. Hiding the dark turn my adventure would soon take. As we drove along the highway, small talk flowed until he suddenly reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out a stack of passports, 4 of them each belonging to a young woman. He told me chilling stories of each one. His girlfriend who died in a motorcycle accident, another who perished in a car crash, a third who succumbed to a brain tumor, and the last who fell off a shore. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This man was cursed with a dark history. Unease settled over me like a heavy fog, but I stayed silent, unsure of how to react. The driver then announced he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris, and I felt a sense of dread washing over me as he said that. This wasn't a charming detour I'd imagined. Instead, we veered off the main road onto a narrow dirt path, surrounded by dense woods. My heart raced as the forest closed in around us, shrouding us in darkness. At 5 p.m., as the sun began to set, he abruptly declared, "I don't want to speak English anymore." Cutting off all communication, the tension in the car escalated, and my instincts screamed for me to escape. I was aware of my hand inching towards the door handle, a move that surely didn't go unnoticed. The car slowed to a crawl, and my mind raced with panic. Was he going to hurt me? Did he have a weapon? I don't know, but my heart was pounding and adrenaline was coursing through me. In that moment of terror, a strange resolve formed within me. I wouldn't be a helpless victim. I was strong and determined. I had traveled enough to recognize the primal dance of fear and power that unfolded between us. If he wanted to threaten me, he'd find I was not easily subdued. As the car continued to inch forward, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. Perhaps he sensed my defiance because suddenly he accelerated, breaking free from the suffocating woods. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, grateful to be emergent from the grip of those dark trees. He glanced over and asked if I wanted to spend the night at his house. Images of a filthy torture chamber flickered through my mind, and I politely declined. My silence had been my shield, keeping me safe during that eerie journey. Maybe if I had spoken out of turn, my face could have been different. I stepped out onto the roadside as night enveloped the world around me, watching him drive away. Confusion and exhaustion washed over me, and I found a spot to sleep under the stars, too drained to process the night's events. Fast forward 20 years. When I was teaching English to a German business student at a coffee shop in Germany, our conversation turned to hitchhiking, and I recounted my harrowing tale. My student's eyes widened as he pulled out his smartphone, Googling French serial killers. When he showed me a photo, I felt my blood run cold. It was him, Patrice Allegra, the man who had driven me through the woods all those years. Back then, he was known for leaving the bodies of young women along French highways, and my heart sank as I recalled my narrow escape. I wished I had gone to the police, but the language barrier had kept me silent. What if I could have helped stopping him? The weight of that possibility hung heavy on my consciousness, haunting me ever since. Perhaps the souls of those lost girls had escaped with me that night, desperate to flee the darkness of the forest. Summer is without a doubt the greatest season. I'd gladly defend that claim against anyone. My passion for summer isn't about wild parties or heavy drinking. It is all about the beauty of nature, the warm weather, and the great outdoors. When the heat rolls in, you'll find me outside far more than in, soaking up every moment. One warm June night a few summers ago, when I was around 17 or 18 years old, I decided to embrace the summer by camping in a massive nature preserve near my house. This place was enormous, almost 1,000 acres, filled with the dense woods and hidden secrets that I hadn't fully explored. My two friends, Chuck and Jackson, joined me for what we thought would be an unforgettable night in the wilderness. And for sure, camping was technically illegal there, but we were confident we wouldn't get caught. Chuck was the camping expert among us, the kind of guy who could have easily played the role of a Boy Scout. He knew countless nuts and survival tricks. Jackson, on the other hand, was our go-to guy for drinks. If he wasn't supplying the booze, he wasn't happy. I remember the warm breeze rustling through my hair as we packed Jackson's car the ideal summer weather wrapping us in a cozy embrace. After a few beers, we set off into the woods around 11:30 p.m., the darkness creeping in as we lugged our camping gear along the winding paths. The alcohol was starting to hit me, adding a haze to my senses, but thankfully Chuck had brought a powerful flashlight to cut through the darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that came with wandering through thick woods at that hour. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small clearing that seemed perfect for camping. We set up our tent as Chuck directed, then focused on starting a fire. After a little effort, we had a crackling blaze, and Jackson produced a portable speaker, filling the air with music. The vibe was just right, and we spent the next couple of hours laughing and drinking, our worries fading away under the stars. But then, just as we were settling in, a deafening whistle shattered the night, sending chill down my spine. It was an eerie sound, loud, yet distant, cutting through the warm summer air like a knife. Jackson quickly switched off the music, and the three of us exchanged worried glances. A cold wave of fear washing over us. My heart raced and I strained to listen. The woods, usually alive with the sounds of nature, had fallen eerily silent. Chuck finally broke the tense silence, urging us to pack up and leave. But Jackson and I hesitated. Sure, staying put felt wrong, but rushing off into the darkness seemed just as dangerous. Time ticked by and we decided to hunker down for a while longer, though every instinct screamed for us to run. Chuck insisted we keep the fire going. It could ward off dangerous animals. As the reality of our situation set in, I realized we were miles from civilian, deep in the woods at 3 a.m., with something unknown lurking nearby. Minutes dragged on, and our conversation dropped to hushed whispers. Just when I thought we might finally relax, something small darted across Jackson's shoulder, landing with a thud in the fire. A firecracker. Panic surged through me as I screamed, and Chuck bolted upright, heart racing as he drove into the darkness, his flashlight beam slicing through the night. Jackson and I scrambled after him, leaving all our gear behind in our frantic escape. We sprinted through the woods, adrenaline fueling our flight. The shadows seemed to stretch and creep around us, and Jackson suddenly doubled over, sick from fear. Chuck turned off his flashlight, and we stood there, gasping for breath, straining to hear if anyone had followed us. To our surprise, it seemed like no one was on our trail, but I was still shaking to my core. Why would anyone throw a firecracker at us in the middle of the woods? Jackson wanted to get out of there and never look back, but Chuck was insistent. He couldn't leave his gear behind, and the fire was still burning. I was incredulous. How could he be worried about a campfire when we just escaped something terrifying? But eventually, I agreed we should at least check on our campsite, convinced that whoever had thrown the firecracker was just a prankster. Chuck expertly retraced our steps, and soon we could see the faint glow of the fire in the distance. As we crept closer, a wave of dread washed over me, especially when Jackson raised a hand to stop us. A look of horror painted his face as he pointed ahead. I squinted, and what I saw will forever haunt my nightmares. 3 figures sat motionless in our chairs, like lifeless statues. One had his face turned towards us, mouth hanging open, devoid of life. Panic got the most of me, and I was asking myself these couple of questions, just saying, what were they doing, and why weren't they moving? We stood frozen, horrified, until Jackson accidentally kicked a rock, letting out a curse. In an instant, the fire extinguished, snuffed out as if someone had thrown a blanket over it. We didn't waste a moment. We bolted into the darkness, now hearing footsteps crashing behind us. Fear propelled us through the woods, and we ran faster than I ever thought possible until we burst out into the open, reaching Jackson's car. By some miracle, we weren't followed, but the silence that enveloped us on the drive back was thick with unspoken terror. The next day, Chuck insisted we return to the campsite in daylight to collect his belongings. Jackson flat out refused, but I reluctantly agreed to go with Chuck. After searching, we found the campsite seemingly untouched until we got closer and were hit with a putrid smell emanating from Chuck's tent. He unzipped it, revealing a decaying rat inside. The sight so sickening that I knew right then and there that I'd never return to that cursed preserve again.